John Maxon is a veteran of the electric power industry, having spent 32 years as a manager at Commonwealth Edison, with the last third of that time managing the company's office in Washington, D.C. He moved on to serve as president of the Illinois Coalition, the advocacy organization for Illinois' 6 large research universities and 3 national laboratories, and then serving as president of the Greater North Michigan Avenue Association, the business organization for 800 retailers, hotels, and restaurants on Chicago's Magnificent Mile. And with that, please enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, George. I appreciate that. And thank you very much for coming out on a beautiful night to hear a program about my passion. And I hope by the end of the program, it'll be your passion. I'm going to be talking about Samuel Insull, who is considered to be the Henry Ford of electricity. And by that, I mean, he brought in a very expensive thing to the market so that everybody could eventually afford it. A little bit about Samuel Insull before I get into the actual story of his contribution, just about the man personally. I chose a sort of a rusted steel background for this because when some people think about Samuel Insull, he was certainly a high-flying financier with a white stuffed shirt or white starched shirt and sort of a look of a big businessman, but to the heart, he was a builder. And I hope this symbolizes kind of the rusty grit of building because he dedicated his career to that and in fact gave us what we have today, a networked electric system that regardless of how many times you think your lights are out, it's probably the best one in the world. He believed that electricity could be afforded by anybody. When he first got to Chicago, he found out that there were only a few scattered generators around the city, and those serviced the large homes, the people that could afford to have something in the basement that burned coal or burned oil and produced electricity for that house. And he had a much broader vision than that. He was born in England, November 11th, 1859, and people remembered him as a very hardworking young man, but not a standout, really. I mean, he was a good student, but not anybody that appeared to be a genius right off the bat. But he became aware of Thomas Edison. And he said, you know, somebody like Thomas Edison is somebody I can admire and I want to work for him. So he went to work after setting the goal to work for Edison. He went to work for Edison's London company. And he had some jobs there and got to know the people, got to know the format of the business. And when a job opened in the United States as Samuel Insull's personal secretary, I mean, how close could you get to a man? He said, I'd like to apply for that job. And so he came to the United States, he immigrated. He's only 21 years old at the time. Now, Edison is 33, and the two couldn't be different. And more different in a lot of ways. It was kind of interesting that people reported that on first encounter, both of them were shocked. First of all, Samuel Insull was a 21-year-old guy with combed hair, had a kind of a, pardon my term, sissy little suit on. You know, he was a Brit with an accent that was very formal. And Thomas Edison looked at this guy and thought, he can't possibly be the kind of tough guy that I need as a personal assistant. Thomas Edison, on the other hand, 33 years old, to Insull, he looked disheveled and he looked tired and his hair wasn't combed when they first met. And he thought, this can't be the great man that I came to work for. But it wasn't too long, only a matter of weeks, before Thomas Edison was heard saying, he's the only man I ever met who works as hard as I do. And one thing Samuel Insull did was work. He was a 7-day-a-week guy, 24 hours, take out a little time for eating and sleeping. So he was somebody who would today be called a workaholic. He became Edison's personal secretary, and Edison admired him so much that he made him the general manager of his manufacturing division, which was called Edison General Electric. That's what we think of today as General Electric. So at a fairly young age, Thomas Edison was working in Schenectady, New York, turning out Edison's inventions, basically. Edison was the idea man. Insull was the worker, the doer, the guy that set up the processes and got the product out the door. But there were some stockholders involved, and JP Morgan came to town, invested in General Electric, and they put a JP Morgan guy at the head of General Electric, and Insull was, he was offended by that. And kind of interesting that this little offense to JP Morgan would hurt Sam Insull for the rest of his career. So it's not good to get crossways with somebody like JP Morgan. Insull looks around and he finds this little electric company in Chicago that just served a few blocks. And he came here as a president of the Chicago Edison Company. See, what did I do? Just, yeah. Now he's 33 years old, and this is what he looks like. He still doesn't look like a big time executive, but he's still a hardworking guy and somebody that has a sense for detail and a sense for finance. And probably above all, he was a terrific salesman. And by that, I mean, he could sit down and not only sell the product, but he could convince a banker to loan him money. He could convince an investor to buy his stock. He finds Chicago a smattering of small generators. As I said before, there were some in some basements. There were some in, in buildings that might serve one building and the next building. And this was totally different from Insull's sense of how an electric company should work. He said that only the wealthy can afford electricity now, but I want to make it so everybody can afford electricity by building huge generating stations and then amortizing them over the hundreds of thousands of customers that I'll have out there, that I'll keep reducing the cost of electricity to keep the plant running. But the more customers that come in, the lower I can make the price. He takes a pay cut, first of all. That's kind of interesting. Moving from Schenectady to Chicago, he was cut down from about $36,000 a year, a lot of money, to $12,000 a year to work for Chicago Edison. And as I've just said, his real theme was large central stations, spread the capital costs of the stations over as many customers and as many kilowatt hours as possible, improve technology. Now, this was contrary to the mindset of electricity at the dawn of the era, because people would say, no, it's working great. Let's leave it there. No, it's working great. And Insull would say, no, it's 4 years old. Let's get it out of here and get something new in. And then finally, improve the efficiency of the overall operation. He was a stickler for doing things with as few people as possible and, always looking at productivity. So I'll skip over a lot of history here and just say that Chicago Edison eventually merged with Commonwealth Edison in 1907. And of course, Commonwealth Edison, or what we call ComEd, or what we call Exelon, the holding company for ComEd, eventually came out of that. While all this was happening, he met a very interesting woman. Gladys Wallace was a very glamorous opera star, and she was already independently, let's say financially independent. I wouldn't say she was wealthy. She was a respected entertainer. She was a very strong personality, and that would come to her benefit over the coming years. Here's what she looked like with her regular clothes on. And here's what she looked like in opera costume. But she was already, surprisingly, in the circle of opera enthusiasts, very well known both in Chicago and in New York and other cities where opera was popular. They together had only one son, and that was Samuel Insull II, and he was to become active in the company and had very responsible jobs in the future. By the way, he was married, had one son, and that one son played piano his whole life. And he lived on the river in Batavia, and neighbors would say all year long, you could hear piano music coming out of the house. And he must have been a great piano player to dedicate that much time to it. But Samuel Insull III was where the line kind of stalled out. He was never married. So here we are. He builds an empire by, number one, buying up smaller utilities and taking generators out of these basements and whatever. expanding the service territory into places like Lake County, where there was a lot of rural area without electricity. And then encouraging the use of commercial use or residential use, of course, but commercial and industrial use particularly. And he liked that because one of the challenges in utility operation is to balance the load out over the day. You don't want to have real heavy load on a hot summer day, for example, and have fans going and whatever, and then have no load at night because you've got the capacity sitting out there with no revenue to bring in. And so he worked very hard on things like street lighting and encouraging companies to go on shifts at night. So the factory would be up all night and that kind of thing. That's a rate making during the Insull era was a whole different thing. He eventually controlled electric, gas, and interurban railroads in 35 states. So he was obviously one of the most successful holding company managers anywhere in the country. At his peak, he was worth about $400 million in 1925 dollars, and it equals about $2 billion today. So he was one of the most well-respected businessmen, one of the wealthiest people in the country, and one of the most politically influential people in the country, one of the people that society looked up to. It goes on and on. There's a cartoon that I think you probably can't read the words there, but it's basically Mr. Insull at the top there, and he's pushing buttons to the presidents of all of his companies. And then these people sitting at the desks, those are Commonwealth Edison, Public Service Company of Northern Illinois, Chicago Consolidated Traction Company, all of the companies that he was the chairman of. This cartoon, by the way, is in this box here on the wall. So there's a little piece on Insull in that box. Here's what he looked like in the mid-20s. And of course, now he's starting to look like a real executive, and he was, because of the British accent and because of his generally formal mannerisms, somebody who was very well respected in social circles. And of course, Gladys helped out with that because she was very tuned into what it took to be a respected family in high society in Chicago. He becomes charmed by the people, the rolling hills, the farms, and the rural setting of Lake County, and specifically eastern Lake County. And I think he legitimately loved the land and did everything he could to endure it to him and become endeared. He purchased at first 160 acres over in Libertyville, 1907, but it eventually became 4,000 acres. He bought up farms. He built a mansion in 1914. Now remember, he lived at 1100 North Lakeshore Drive downtown, but he built the Cuneo estate, which we know as the Cuneo estate, in 1914, just as a weekend kind of retreat to get away. He had a train station there. And if you notice, there's a railroad that goes right by the Cuneo estate. He could pull his private train up there, get on it and go downtown and come back, in his own private car by himself if he wanted to. I'm sure he had Lake Forest people go with him occasionally and other people they wanted to take downtown, but he didn't have to worry about the drive. Let's put it that way. This is what the Cuneo estate looks like. And I think probably everyone's been there at some time or another. It's a fabulous place. It's pretty much used for weddings and formal sorts of places now. It's officially known as the Loyola University Cuneo Mansion and Gardens, and there's a person there that'll sign you up for tours and general use of the facilities. I'm impressed that they keep it just immaculately. I mean, you look at it, I mean, everything is beautiful. There's not any sign of any kind of aging. The gardens are beautiful. It's really a great place. They've made movies there, you're probably aware. So if you have a chance to go there for any reason, it's worth the walkthrough. The interior is just as spectacular as the outside as well. And just most of it's been, of course, cleaned up and redone, and there's not too many signs of Samuel Insull there, except if you go in the kitchen, you'll see there's a board there, and these bells ring from somebody calling from a bedroom or calling from the dining room. It'll say on there, Mr. Insull's room, Mrs. Insull's room, main bedroom or main dining room and that kind of thing on this big board. So there is at least a little remnant of Insull up there. He opens a business office in Libertyville, and I'm sure we've all been through Libertyville and seen this building on the corner of Milwaukee Avenue and Church Street. And if you notice, there's a kind of a steeple there with a what do they call that, a parapet on the top? Cupola, yes, thank you. And right below the cupola, you'll see a plaque. And if you look at that plaque carefully, there's a P and an S in there for Public Service Company. And that's was Insull's name for the electric system outside of Chicago. So Commonwealth Edison served Chicago, and Northern Illinois outside of Chicago was Public Service Company of Northern Illinois. And that was the public service office. He also opens a bank in Libertyville as well. Libertyville Trust and Savings Bank. It was opened in 1925 and it lasted a couple of years into the Depression before it closed. It was at the other end of the building. So if you went to the left, you'd see the Public Service Company office. And then the bank was that other, where the clock is. He also built Hawthorn School, which is on 60, just a little bit west of Milwaukee Avenue. This is not a very good picture of it, but that's kind of what it looked like in 1924 when it opened up. Interestingly, the classes were in English and in German. So Mundelein, Libertyville, that area must have been an area where German settlers were, and people came there that couldn't understand English. So English and German. It was the gold standard of schools, lasted 75 years. And when they remodeled Hawthorn School just a few years ago, they tore down the last piece of brick from the original school. So it survived a long time. He also set up something called the Lake County Experiment. And this is kind of interesting. Farmers didn't really take to electricity at first. When you think of electricity, and talk about it to a farmer, he would say, why do I need all those poles and all those transformers, all those wires just to save striking a match and lighting a candle? Wouldn't it be easier just to strike the match and light the candle? But the idea from Insull's perspective was if you built the lines out to the farmers, they would use your product. Kind of, you build it and they will come. And it was probably because farmers weren't aware of what electricity could do. So he set up a very aggressive program to try to educate farmers as to the many things that would make life easier on the farm that were electric. He built something called the Model Farm, which is at 176 and 60. It's the Tullamore subdivision now. But it looked like this. This is actually the cover of a brochure that I have. And it had all kinds of things inside of it, in the house and in the barn, that used electricity that would be a surprise to a farmer. For example, you can see up there, they're grinding grain up in the left there with an electric device. They've got heaters in the hen house on the upper right side. They've got a corn sheller down in the lower right side. So farmers weren't thinking in those terms. They were thinking in terms of a candle. And wow, electricity can do all that. So the model farm was very instrumental in promoting rural electrification. Also in the house, if you look at that, she's got an electric oven and she's got some kind of a mixer on the counter there. Again, trying to promote electricity to the rural family. This is what the model farm looked like. And notice that house on the left, kind of a big old farmhouse. And if you go out there today, believe it or not, it's still there. The house is there. The barns are all gone. The barns are all, the rest of the farm is a 1950s or 1960s vintage subdivision. But the house is there, and it's quite a stately place. And it's way out of place from the 1960s houses that are there. But it's kind of fun to imagine what the rest of the farm must have been like. Here's the north end of the model farm. This is looking south from 176. And you can see it's just now being developed, and these townhouses aren't more than a couple of years old or a few years old. That water tower there used to say Tullamore on it, and they repainted it and put Mundelein on it, but so the model farm is all gone, but it's interesting to go there and see it. Also, Samuel Insull was a good friend of Cardinal Mundelein. Now, Cardinal Mundelein was the first cardinal in the United States. He was a well-respected person nationally, and Insull helped him acquire the land and expand St. Mary's of the Lake University, which is on the north side of 176, just before you get to Mundelein. You've passed the sign 1,000 times probably. It's not a restricted area. Turn in there sometime and just drive around, and you'll be impressed with the architecture. It's really beautiful. Cardinal Mundelein was very influential, and I can't tell you, I'm not Catholic, and I can't tell you how he was influential, but in terms of liturgy, in terms of the format of the services and whatever, he was somebody that American Catholics really admired. In fact, he was on the cover of Time magazine as somebody who was one of the major religious leaders of the time. So it's quite an impressive place when you get inside of it. The signage on 176 isn't much to speak of, but it's one of only 5 papal universities around the world that educates priests. And you can see it, the architecture is spectacular. There is a lake back there, St. Mary's of the Lake, obviously. And I just can't say enough for the amount of brick and the amount of geometry and everything else that went into building this place. It's really quite a spectacular place. I don't know what you call that type of, that Georgian, or probably, yeah. At any rate, one of the things that Insull helped with was the 28th International Eucharistic Congress. And if you haven't heard about this, Google it. You'll be amazed. 1 million Catholics from all over the world came to Chicago for this conference of Catholics. It was June 20 through June 24 of 1926. And half of them, 500,000 people, came out to Mundelein, to this facility, to have communion served by Cardinal Mundelein. Now you imagine, how did they get 500,000 people out? Well, by this time, Insull had a railroad, and he had cars that left every 2 minutes from downtown to bring people out to Mundelein, and he had a station virtually across the street from the entrance to St. Mary of the Lake. I'll get to that in a minute. Estimated 500,000 came to Mundelein. Incidentally, I was told that all the roads leading to Mundelein from downtown, like Milwaukee Avenue, were made one way in the morning and one way in the evening coming back. So if you were not on that path, you had to go side streets and find your way back downtown if, let's say, you wanted to go there in the morning when traffic was all out to Mundelein. But trains left every 2 minutes. There was one red train that if you were there from the papal city, from the Vatican, you rode on that red train. So Insull thought of everything. The communion was conducted by Cardinal Mundelein. I got to believe that he had a lot of help. I mean, 500,000 wafers, and that's a pretty heavy charge.
What year was that?
1926. He helped fund Condell Hospital. What he was trying to do was he was trying to develop a community with full services that would have a school, would have a hospital. And in 1928, Condell opened with 28 beds. And again, apologize for this blurry picture. Here's the front page of the paper. And you see up there, June 13th, 1928, the Condell opened. That's what it looks like today. And again, I was told that they just recently tore down the last little piece of the old building, in the last decade or so, having totally remodeled the whole place and, of course, expanded it dramatically. He also had the Lake County Land Association. He started that in 1923, and this was an effort to develop the area residentially. And he had two ideas. One, he was going to put in a general subdivision with a lot of people in it. And then he was going to do another subdivision with only high-end homes. So he hoped that people from Chicago would live out in a place called Hawthorn Lakes. And the people in Libertyville would live in this more conventional type of subdivision. Liberty Highlands was the conventional one. And if you know where Libertyville High School is on 176, if you turn right, you go into the high school going west. And if you turn left, you go into Libertyville Highlands. And in order to build Libertyville Highlands, you had to tear up a racetrack. Believe it or not, there was a horse racing track there before. And it started out as horse racing, and then they raced cars there. It was called the 1 mile track. That was the name of it, the Libertyville 1 mile track. And I'm going to show you a picture looking right at those stands. See where that arrow is up there? That's a map of the subdivision. So you can see it's a lot of homes. And that blue arrow up there is pointing at the stands. There's a little box there. And that's at the corner of Rockland Road and Dawes Street. Okay, so I went up there and I stood in the middle of the road looking exactly where that arrow is. And that's what it looks like today. So there's no vestige that it was a racetrack or that it was anything. And these homes looked like they were built after the war. So I think what happened was the company probably got started and they weren't able to complete it prior to the Depression. And these look more like 1950 vintage type homes. But there was a racetrack grandstand right there on the other side of that stop sign. It's the thing about history, huh? He founds the community of Countryside Lake. First of all, he constructs the lake by damming up the creek that's running through there. And he envisions this as a very aristocratic community with wealthy people coming from the Chicago area. And he brings over an architect from England who's a specialist in Tudor construction. So Countryside Lake is intended as a high-end community. Here's a picture. It was taken in the 80s, but this is probably what it looked like from the air back in the 1920s when he purchased the land. There wasn't much there. If you took this same picture today, there are a lot of high-end homes there, and it's a big subdivision. Here's what the lake looks like. You notice there are two islands. One island still has a Insull era hunting lodge on it. You can't get there unless you wade through the water or go on a canoe or walk across the ice. And then the other one has a house on it, which was occupied by Samuel Insull II. And Walter Hohenwarter was the architect that Insull brought over to develop this whole thing, lay it out. It turns out he was a little bit too late. In 1929, they only built one house. That's the house that's there now. And James Manns lives in it. If you know James Manns, he's a descendant of whoever it was that founded Abbott Laboratories. And so he's got a really nice piece of property right on the lake in that single house. Then they went out of business. And of course, all the houses were built during the late 50s and 60s, the other high-end houses that are there. Then we get to the North Shore Line. This is an interurban railroad that Insull financed and headed up. And probably some of you who are from this area actually rode on the North Shore Line. And let's see a little show of hands here. Yeah, so okay. You can probably tell me a lot more about it. I'm a late arrival. I didn't get here until 1968, and the railroad closed in 1963. So I never rode on the North Shore Line. But to make a long story short, it was an electric railroad, and that's important because it ran all the time, and it ran at night just as much as it ran during the day. So he was able to balance the load. He supplied the electricity, and then he sold tickets for the railroad. So he was making money off of using his own product. This was one of the early trains this is what they look like, and that's probably more of what you're thinking of when you think of a 50s or 60s North Shore line. It would start in the loop, and it went all the way up to Milwaukee. And I'm sorry, I don't have a better map for you, but if you look at this map on the left, Chicago is at the bottom, and it came up in two tracks. One track paralleled Route 41 to the west, and the other one paralleled Sheridan Road to the east. And of course, if you go there today, well, there's a picture of a typical station. This one happens to be Libertyville. Here's a more modern station. This picture was probably taken in the 60s. Just it looked, judging from the cars on the right, they look like they're 1960s cars. But this would be what the right-of-way looks like today, south of Route 176 coming out of Mundelein. This one spur cut off from Lake Bluff and went west over to Mundelein to St. Mary's of the Lake. And then they both came together in Waukegan, and one spur went up to, the final spur went up to Milwaukee. You probably have all seen this. This is on Sheridan Road just before you get to, what would it be, Green Bay Road, something like that. And that is actually a separate bridge from the other bridge you can see, which is the North Shore, or which is the Chicago Northwestern line. So you say, why did they ever make two railroads, two separate companies, parallel each other? And the answer to that was the North Shore line was an interurban, and it stopped many more times, more frequently than the Chicago Northwestern did. Remember, this was before Metra, and the Chicago Northwestern was really get there quickly without stopping at a lot of stops, whereas the North Shore line could drop you almost anywhere, and you wouldn't be that far from home. Here's another picture of the same bridge, and there's a really nicely kept bike path. This would be standing at the end of the bridge looking north into Lake Forest. And I'm not sure who owns that right of way now and who takes care of it, whether it's the park district or the county, but it's all mowed, it's all taken care of. It's trimmed back, as you can see on the right, so there's not trees coming right up to it. It's really a nicely done piece of property. Once you get up to the Lake Forest Station, which you'll all recognize, it looks like, even though the bike path curves around and goes up Sheridan Road, you can still imagine the right-of-way going just west of the station, right through the parking lot. And of course, they don't want bike riders riding through the parking lot, so they've rerouted the bike path, but the right-of-way is basically still there. Then coming north out of Lake Forest, again, what a terrific resource if you're a bike rider or if you're a walker or whatever. It goes up to North Chicago, and then it just turns into, overgrowth, weeds and whatever. So the right-of-way is still there, but no one has invested in any kind of a recreational resource. So I'm getting to the end of the story here, but when the Great Depression hit, Insull sold its personal assets to try to shore up the Insull industry stock. And as the stock lost value, he tried to buy more shares and keep it boosted up. Excuse me. So by the 1930s, he was bankrupt. I told you that in the heyday, before the Depression, he was worth $400 million in those dollars. And after the crash, he was $22 million in debt, borrowing money to buy ComEd stock and whatever. It's really a financial fall from grace, so to speak. He died in Paris in 1938, had a heart attack in a subway station. They couldn't identify who he was and put him in the morgue. And when Gladys called the police and said he didn't come home, they checked everybody in the morgue and they found SI, a laundry mark on his underwear. And that's how they identified Samuel Insull and identified that he had passed on. In summary, I just came up with this as kind of a general statement. Samuel Insull's passion for Lake County enriched the lives of thousands of its residents by creating jobs, making life easier, and significantly improving healthcare and educational resources. That's a pretty big charge for a guy to come to town and make that kind of a contribution. Now, I took a picture of his grave, which is in England, in East Putney. I couldn't find a picture of the grave but I did find a picture that my son took of me taking the picture. So that's a picture of me taking the picture that proves that I took the picture. We also did a rubbing of the grave, and you can just barely see it if you look at it. You can't really read it at first. And when we went into the cemetery, I asked the caretaker there, I said, you know, where is Samuel Insull's grave? He said, you know, I've worked here 17 years and you're the second person that's asked me about that person. Who is that guy anyway? You know, fame is a fleeting thing, you know? At any rate, if you have any interest in pursuing this, there's a very good bio that was written in 1962 where Forrest McDonald actually interviewed business associates of Samuel Insull's, and they all said that when they were complimenting him, Forrest McDonald said that when he was interviewing these people, when they were complimenting Insull, they spoke very positively and they were very confident. When they had something bad to say about Insull, they kind of muffled themselves as though the ghost of the old man was still out there and could hurt him some way, you know? So that's an excellent book. Then John Hogan wrote A Spirit Capable, which is the history of Commonwealth Edison. And a local guy from Grays Lake did a very good job. John Wasik wrote A Merchant of Power, which those are three books that are good. I'd like to say thanks for this presentation. The Cook Memorial Public Library helped me with some of the pictures. Jim Mance let me take a picture of his house. John Galante gave me some pictures here also. Lisa Cushing at Loyola sent me the pictures of Loyola. And of course, George for having set up tonight. So thanks very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure that there are people in this audience that know a lot about Samuel Insull that maybe I don't know, and I'd be glad to hear from you, or I'd be happy to field any questions that you have. Yes, sir.
Given his wife's operatic aspect and the fact that he built the opera house in the tower down in West Drive.
Right.
Did he ever get into the musical business up here at Lake County in any way?
You know, I never have heard of any reference of that. What this gentleman is referring to is that his wife was a big opera fan. He was a big opera fan. And so he built the Lyric Opera House for the benefit of the people of Chicago. And he wanted it to be sustainable. So he built a 40-story office building on top of it. And he built the building so that the size of the retail revenue, the real estate revenue would roughly match the increase in the cost of running an opera. And it's worked out beautifully. I mean, it's one of the best financed operas in the whole country because rents go up at the rate of whatever it costs to pay the orchestra and and run the opera. But that was a huge cultural contribution they made to the city of Chicago. I didn't mention it because there's another whole talk like this you could do for Chicago. And, yeah. But I don't know of him doing anything other than that musically. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi. My first job was on the 17th floor of that building. I'm curious, did Insull play golf?
He played golf. He enjoyed golf. He was a member of Outwencia Country Club. He was not, I guess, a really great golfer because you don't read too much about it in the bio and you don't hear very many references of it. It does reference it in this little bio over here, but I don't think he was a big golfer. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. With your passion for what he built, especially the electric company, what do you think he would think of today with ComEd and Exxon where it is today?
Wow. That's a tough question for me personally, because I happen to know the 4 people that have been indicted. And I also worked in government affairs for a good bit of my career there. And I would say that he would be totally intolerant of any illegal activity. And one thing about Samuel Insull that you are impressed by when you read about him is he's very detail oriented and he has no patience for any carelessness or misbehavior. So I'd look at it that way, but then I'd also think that he got things done and he was not a real popular person in some circles. you know, I gave this program on a Zoom. And one of the people on the Zoom came on and said, my mother hated him because he wanted a piece of property that she had and she didn't want to sell. And he kept after her and he kept after her and he kept, and, you know, so he was not a popular guy if you weren't on his side. But I guess, you know, that's going to happen. So. No, I don't know if that answers your question, but if you felt some tap dancing there, I was trying to do it. So. Any other comments or questions? Yes, sir. Oh,
Found, for anybody that's interested in more about the Eucharistic Congress, one of the Railroad Historical Societies that's based here in town has a publication, I think it's called A Transportation Mirror, which it was. And
Okay.
it's well illustrated, well researched, probably 40 pages thick, but tells the whole story of a movement that massive people went on and then get them out.
okay. Everybody hear that? The Railroad Association or club or whatever has a whole book on that Eucharistic Congress and getting people out to it. Yes, sir.
Name of the organization is Shoreline Interurban Historical Society.
Okay.
Our website is shore-line.org, and you can buy the book online and enjoy it. It is a stupendous story. And the reason that they could actually do that was because the Skokie Valley line had not yet opened for regular service.
Okay.
It was rushed to completion in order to provide a railroad for all of these trains coming out of the loop to get to St. Mary of the Lake, where the special station had been.
Okay.
And so it's an amazing story. The Chicago streetcar system had to handle millions of people on their regular loads, in which they put every single car that they own, over 3,500 of them, on the street at the same time. Now imagine the electrical load that produced.
Yeah.
Put money in Sam's pocket.
Yeah.
But another fact that you alluded to was that Sam did not like J.P. Morgan. And the feeling was apparently mutual.
Yes.
And so when the Depression hit, Morgan wasted no time in calling all the loans
Mm-hmm.
that Insull had taken out. And that precipitated heavily the bankruptcy that occurred. And of course, all of the allegations that were made that he was running a Ponzi scheme, the name hadn't been invented back then, which he was completely acquitted of all charges in court. And if you want to see something that's very interesting, there is a short newsreel clip available online of him speaking. He didn't like to speak in public.
Mm-hmm.
His voice was and it didn't sound very professional.
Okay.
And of course, he had a bit of a British accent too, so the
Right.
combination made him less than interested in being a public speaker.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a fascinating little clip. Only runs like 30 seconds or something like
Yeah.
that. But very worthwhile. You can Google it, I'm sure, to find it.
Okay, I very much appreciate that whole commentary. I'll tell you just quickly, I've seen the organization's website, your website, I guess it is. You must be a member of the club. I tripped on it when I was just researching the North Shoreline, and it is a fabulous website. There's so much information there, and it's one of those things you get stuck on, and you know, you hear from downstairs from your wife, you're gonna make the bed or whatever, you know, but you know, no, she doesn't. She's sitting back there, and I shouldn't have said that. But you know, it's really a fabulous website, and I congratulate you if you had anything to do with that. I left out a whole big piece of the Insull story, which was, of course, a criminal indictment. People thinking nobody can make the country lose this much money and not have done something wrong. And he suffered through a horrible legal battle and was acquitted of all charges. But that's a whole nother story. And it's a kind of a sad one in light of what his contribution was. There was a hand back here. Yes, sir.
I have two pieces of information. I was researching the gas electric combination lines in the train station, trying to figure out you know, why there was gas and electricity. So the Highland Park electric companies supplied electricity to, Lake Forest from 4 p.m. to 1 a.m.
Okay.
Because there was no daytime demand for electricity. Then in, January 1, 1904, Insull bought those, so the Evanston Electric Company supplied electricity to Lake Forest in the daytime, and the Highland Park supplied electricity at night. And then in 1908, the Waukegan power plant was built, which supplied electricity 24 hours a day.
Yeah, okay.
The other interesting thing is people have seen the bicycle paths bridges replaced, the two on the shoreline and the one on the Smoky Valley line, right by 41. And the bridge that you showed, the North Shore Line cement bridge, was sandblasted to make it pretty. At that time, the city was interested in demolishing that bridge and putting in one of those traditional bicycle path bridges.
Yeah.
And it's in the agenda. So it's gonna be reviewed for demolishment, I believe.
Oh, really? Huh.
At least it was when I checked 2 years ago. So
That's a,
we can say that.
that's a shame because I took those pictures fairly recently and the bridge seems to be in perfect condition. Now there's some stairs down to, at the side, and those are deteriorated and it's a little hazardous walking up and down the stairs with the concrete falling apart and whatever, but the bridge is really in great shape and hope they don't tear that down. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Two-part question, possibly.
Okay.
In the work and the research you do, did you come across Herman B. von Holst, the architect who did a lot of Insull's electric substation design, and he also built the building in Milwaukee after the $10,000 show? And second, did you have you ever studied substation of Lake Law on Green Bay 176 as part of the Lake County model?
Yeah, I guess the easy answer would be no and no. So I'm sorry. What was the name, the first name? I didn't recognize it.
Herman B. von Holst.
Yeah, von Holst. No, I don't think so. And I think I'm aware of the substation you're talking about, but I frankly never worked in this area. My area was McHenry County. I worked on the south side of Chicago, south of 39th Street. I worked in Chicago North, but I was never this far east. This is run out of an office in Libertyville. And I never really, I don't know too much about the actual wiring of Lake Forest, let's call it that. But thanks for the question. Yes, sir.
I'm curious if you know much about his condition of Chicago Edison. So like, did Edison mind that he was leaving for Chicago? It sounds like he stayed within the broader portfolio, like Edison portfolio, but curious what that transition was like. You know much about that?
Yeah, I guess, well, first of all, Chicago Edison, was founded in 1887 by 7 investors. This was before Insull got to this country. So people say, well, Samuel Insull, he founded Commonwealth Edison. No, the Commonwealth Edison's progenitor company was Chicago Edison. Interesting, one of those 7 people, was Tad Lincoln, son of the president. And he went on to be part of Isham, Lincoln and Beal, the big law firm downtown, which was ComEd's law firm all through the Insull era, right up until it went out of business, 1980, something like that. And one of the most phenomenal collapses of a law firm you can think of. But the culture really then was selling small generators to people that could buy them. It was a different culture than Insull instituted when he came in 1892. By the way, if you recognize, he came here in 1892. The fair was 1893. So he was here for all the arc lighting that made it the White City, and he bought a lot of the fair equipment to put to work on the Commonwealth Edison system. So he's very familiar with what went on at the fair. That was probably his first real involvement. I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
May 1908, that was when the, plans were developed for the substation on Lake Bluff.
Okay,
To,
1908, that was before my time.
it was, handle all the, services south of Lake Bluff and west in the country.
Okay. You know, just as a quick little aside, Sam Insull went out and he tried to buy all these utilities that were already set up. And there's one on the North Shore that he couldn't buy. And he offered them everything but the kitchen sink, and they still wanted to generate their own power. Anybody know what town that is? Wilmette. I'm sorry, it's not Wilmette, it's Winnetka. Correct. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and it's worked out beautifully for them because for many years they had to have their own generating station and it was a mess. You know, they had all these environmental regulations and it was a really tough thing. But in today's economy, you can buy from utilities across the country, bring it in over a common carrier transmission system and use it. So they come out smelling like a rose, really. The other towns right off the top of my head are Batavia, Geneva, Woodstock until about the 1960s. ComEd finally got, bought them. But there are about five other towns that are pockets in the ComEd system that just wouldn't sell to Insull. Sort of interesting. Yes, ma'am.
How do you go bankrupt? Because people need electricity and I don't
Yeah.
understand them.
Okay, basically what it is, let's say the stock price is at $100, okay, and how can I, all of a sudden people start selling their stock because they think, oh my gosh, the banks are closing, I've got to get some cash to live on. So they sell their stock, and now there's more stock available than there was before, so the price is going to come down, right? And there's a lot of stock out there that's for sale. People are lowering the price, trying to sell their stock. And he would say, well, I'm going to take my own money, my own 400 million, and I'm going to buy the stock to try to keep it up to that $100 mark. And he spent all of his money and, as I say, went $22 million into debt, trying to keep the stock price up so that people wouldn't think that things that the company was going to be non-operational. And eventually what happened, it went into a bankruptcy. It was reorganized. Money from other sources came in, government money, just to keep the lights on. And of course, now it's a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange. That's kind of the short story. But the general thing about stock is if there's a lot of it out there, the price is low. If there's not much of it out there, and people don't want to sell it, the price stays high. So I don't know if that's too remedial or sorry about that. Anybody else? Okay, well, I just want to thank you for coming. I hope you were entertained and learned a little something, and I hope you have a great rest of the evening.